Came the yellow days of winter, filled with boredom. The rust-coloured earth was covered with a threadbare, meagre tablecloth of snow full of holes. There was not enough of it for some of the roofs, and so they stood there, black and brown, shingle and thatch, arcs containing the sooty expanses of attics, coal-black cathedrals bristling with ribs of rafters, beams and spars, the dark lungs of winter winds. Each dawn revealed new chimney stacks and chimney pots, which had emerged during the hours of darkness, blown up by the night winds, the black pipes of a devil's organ. The chimney sweeps could not get rid of the crows, which in the evening covered the branches of the trees around the church with living black leaves, then took off fluttering and came back, each clinging to its own place on its own branch, only to fly away at dawn in large flocks like gusts of soot, flakes of dirt undulating and fantastic, blackening with their insistent cawing the musty yellow streaks of light. The days hardened with cold and boredom like last year's loaves of bread. One began to cut them with blunt knives, without appetite, with a lazy indifference. Father had stopped going out. He banked up the stoves, studied the ever-elusive essence of fire, experienced the salty metallic taste and the smoky smell of wintry salamanders that licked the shiny soot in the throat of the chimney. He applied himself lovingly at that time to all manner of small repairs in the upper regions of the rooms. At all hours of the day one could see him crouched on top of the ladder, working at something under the ceiling, at the cornices over the tall windows, at the counterweights and chains of the hanging lamps. Following the custom of house painters, he used a pair of steps as enormous stilts, and he felt perfectly happy in that bird's eye perspective, close to the sky, leaves and birds painted on the ceiling. He grew more and more remote from practical affairs. When my mother, worried and unhappy about his condition, tried to draw him into a conversation about business, about the payments due at the end of the month, he listened to her absent-mindedly, anxiety showing in his abstracted look. Sometimes he stopped her with a warning gesture of the hand in order to run to a corner of the room, put his ear to a crack in the floor, and by lifting the index fingers of both hands, emphasize the gravity of the investigation and begin to listen intently. At that time, we did not yet understand the sad origin of these eccentricities, the deplorable complex which had been maturing in him. Mother had no influence over him, but he gave a lot of respectful attention to Adela. The cleaning of his room was to him a great and important ceremony, of which he always arranged to be a witness, watching all Adela's movements with a mixture of apprehension and pleasurable excitement. He ascribed to all her functions a deeper symbolic meaning. When, with young, firm gestures, the girl pushed a long-handled broom along the floor, Father could hardly bear it. Tears would stream from his eyes. Silent laughter transformed his face, and his body was shaken by spasms of delight. He was ticklish to the point of madness. It was enough for Adela to waggle her fingers at him, to imitate tickling, for him to rush through all the rooms in a wild panic, banging the doors after him, to fall at last on the bed in the farthest room and wriggle in convulsions of laughter, imagining the tickling which he found irresistible. Because of this, Adela's power over Father was almost limitless. At that time, we noticed for the first time Father's passionate interest in animals. To begin with, it was the passion of the huntsman and the artist, rolled into one. It was also perhaps a deeper biological sympathy of one creature for kindred yet different forms of life, a kind of experimenting in the unexplored regions of existence. Only at a later stage did matters take that uncanny, complicated, essentially sinful and unnatural turn, which it is better not to bring into the light of day. But it all began with the hatching out of birds' eggs. With a great outlay of effort and money, Father imported from Hamburg or Holland or from zoological stations in Africa birds' eggs, on which he set enormous brood hens from Belgium. It was a process which fascinated me as well, this hatching out of the chicks, which were real anomalies of shape and colour. It was difficult to anticipate in these monsters with enormous, fantastic beaks, which they opened wide immediately after birth, hissing greedily to show the backs of their throats, in these lizards with frail, naked bodies of hunchbacks, the future peacocks, pheasants, grouse, or condors. Placed in cotton wool in baskets, this dragon brood lifted blind, wall-eyed heads on thin necks, croaking voicelessly from their dumb throats. My father would walk along the shelves, dressed in a green baize apron, like a gardener in a hothouse of cacti, and conjure up from nothingness these blind bubbles pulsating with life, these impotent bellies receiving the outside world only in the form of food, these growths on the surface of life, climbing blindfolded towards the light. A few weeks later, when these blind buds of matter burst open, the rooms were filled with the bright chatter and scintillating chirruping of their new inhabitants. The birds perched on the curtained pelmets, on the tops of wardrobes. They nestled in the tangle of tin branches and the metal scrolls of the hanging lamps. While Father pored over his large ornithological textbooks and studied their coloured plates, these feathery phantasms seemed to rise from the pages and fill the rooms with colours, with splashes of crimson, strips of sapphire, verdigris and silver. At feeding time they formed a motley undulating bed on the floor, a living carpet which at the intrusion of a stranger would fall apart, scatter into fragments, flutter in the air, and finally settle high under the ceilings. I remember in particular a certain condor, an enormous bird with a featherless neck, its face wrinkled and knobbly. It was an emaciated ascetic, a Buddhist lama, full of imperturbable dignity in its behaviour, guided by the rigid ceremonial of its great species. When it sat facing my father, motionless in the monumental position of ageless Egyptian idols, its eyes covered with a whitish cataract, which it pulled down sideways over its pupil to shut itself up completely in the contemplation of its dignified solitude, it seemed, with its stony profile, like an older brother of my father's. Its body and muscles seemed to be made of the same material. It had the same hard, wrinkled skin, the same desiccated, bony face, the same horny, deep eye sockets. Even the hands, strong in the joints, my father's long, thick hands with their rounded nails, had their counterpart in the condor's claws. I could not resist the impression, when looking at the sleeping condor, that I was in the presence of a mummy, a dried-out, shrunken mummy of my father. I believe that even my mother noticed the strange resemblance, although we never discussed the subject. It is significant that the condor used my father's chamber pot. Not content with the hatching out of more and more new specimens, my father arranged the marriages of birds in the attic. He sent out matchmakers. He tied up eager, attractive birds in the holes and crannies under the roof, and soon the roof of our house, an enormous double-rigged shingle roof, became a real bird's hostel, a Noah's Ark to which all kinds of feathery creatures flew from far afield. Long after the liquidation of the bird's paradise, this tradition persisted in the avian world, and during the period of spring migration, our roof was besieged by whole flocks of cranes, pelicans, peacocks, and sundry other birds. However, after a short period of splendour, the whole undertaking took a sorry turn. It soon became necessary to move my father to 2 rooms at the top of the house, which had served as storage rooms. We could hear from there at dawn the mixed clangor of birds' voices. The wooden walls of the attic rooms, helped by the resonance of the empty space under the gables, sounded with the roar, the flutterings, the crowing, the gurgling, the mating cries. For a few weeks, father was lost from view. He only rarely came down to the apartment, and when he did, we noticed that he seemed to have shrunk, to become smaller and thinner. Occasionally forgetting himself, he would rise from his chair at table, wave his arms as if they were wings, and emit a long drawn-out bird's call, while his eyes misted over. Then, rather embarrassed, he would join us in laughing it off and try to turn the whole incident into a joke. One day, during springtime cleaning, Adela suddenly appeared in father's bird kingdom. Stopping in the doorway, she wrung her hands at the fetid smell that filled the room, the heaps of droppings covering the floor, the tables and the chairs. Without hesitation, she flung open the window, and with the help of a long broom, she prodded the whole mass of birds into life. A fiendish cloud of feathers and wings rose, screaming, and Adela, like a furious Maenad, protected by the whirlwind of her thyrsus, danced the dance of destruction. My father, waving his arms in panic, tried to lift himself into the air with his feathered flock. Slowly the winged cloud thinned, until at last Adela remained on the battlefield, exhausted and out of breath, along with my father, who now, adopting a worried hangdog expression, was ready to accept complete defeat. A moment later, my father came downstairs, a broken man, an exiled king who had lost his throne and his kingdom.